Oh, it's time. Time to get radical.
Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome to Radical Comment of the Week for March the 2nd through March the 8th, 2021. These are the very best comments from that time period. The three honorable mentions come to us from Rockboy245, Peanut Man's Emporium of Random Crap, and Mariozian. The bronze medal comes to us from TV Games. This will be controversial, but if cooler heads prevailed, I would say absolutely no game would be worth more than $1,000. And that's talking about a completely rare, fully boxed, original, unbroken shrink-wrapped game. Even the NWC cards, and only if they had some provenance attached to them, i.e. this was used at the official Nintendo World Championships, or this was the official prize for winning the Nintendo Power Contest. Because, at the end of the day, overeager collectors have made these items worth more than their parts. In fact, as demonstrated by the AVGN and Path and S-Punk crossover video, things like the NWC carts are easily replicated. Take some gray or gold game pack shells, burn some ROMs, add a quality label, and presto, you have a high-valued game in your collection. I, of course, don't advocate anyone doing this, but what's to stop even official sources reprinting old games just to get in on the frenzied market? Maybe Nintendo decides they want to make a stack of the NWC cartridges for the hell of it, and without anything to differentiate it from the original, it's unlikely but always a possibility. It's crazy to think that some people's 5 or 6 figure investments can be toppled by A, anyone with access to easily obtained parts and some attention to detail, or B, the company that doesn't give a crap about someone's valuable collection and wants to profit off nostalgia for their back catalog. That's why I never understood people dropping crazy down payment on a house money for games. They're flimsy investments, and to be honest, they only reach these high values because of collector one-upmanship. Yes, the NWC cards are most certainly rare, but outside of the code, which has been dumped several times over by now, nothing about any part of it is it unique or here's the thing, right? Like I said various times, if something is easily replicated, how much is it really worth? Okay? How easy is it to replicate, in great detail, a rare vehicle? How easy is it to replicate a rare vehicle? One might say, very easy. Ford can re-replicate a rare vehicle. It would, be newer, be shinier. You might be able to tell the difference, but you can easily replicate it. It can be easily replicated. Some things are hard to replicate. Some things we look at as having higher value because, paint on a canvas, for instance. The canvas itself. A rare painting is very hard to replicate other than maybe, photocopies. But some people might make the argument, well, it's just a picture. You can print out a picture. A little bit of a difference, though. A little bit of a difference on how people feel about these things. I guess you look at time when these things existed. So there's a premium on these things because they existed during a certain time. Okay? Just when it comes to replicating, Nintendo could actually just go ahead and say, you know what? We want to profit off this nostalgia. We want to re-release these, and they can because they're Nintendo. They could actually 100% re-release these, and they could make the argument, you know what? We want collectors to have more collectors to have this, knowing that would set people like Path and S-Punk and his little buddy Ian off in a frenzy. It'd be in a frenzy, right? So you have and that would be ironic too, because you have a guy that basically built everything he is, Pat the NES-Punk, off of Nintendo, and riding Nintendo, he built everything he is, and everything about his existence has to do with Nintendo. Okay? What would happen if Nintendo actually, would they be the scumbag seller of the week? The silver medal comes to us from Terranigma. It's just his opinion, and when you take into account that he owns an authentic copy, it's not that hard to see why Pat's opinion is what it is, and it is Pat the NES-Punk who has shitty opinions more often than not. Personally, I don't see anything wrong with repro carts as long as it's labeled and the buyer is aware, of course. As someone that is pro-free market, I'm not bothered by some of these older rare games being worth as much money as they are. Something's worth is always determined by the buyer. Personally, if I want to play some of these expensive games I don't own, I'll just use a flash card or another method. It's not that hard to see why Pat is always against emulation or reproduction cards, because it gives anyone the ability to play his entire collection at a tiny, tiny fraction of the current market cost. Even if you wanted to play in original hardware, a flash card, a jailbroken system, or an SD loader will do the job. If it's for the love of the game itself, well, you can play it, emulate it, or whatever, and experience it. Many of these big collectors believe themselves to be as custodians and caretakers of video game history and preservation, and I suppose in some way they are, but they are preserving these games for themselves. Video games are meant to be played and they're meant to be experienced, and true custodian or caretaker of video game history are the people that dump ROMs and disk images into the internet where anyone can experience these works of art. That's a great point, you know. Why is it that people like Pat and John Hancock and these collectors of rare games, why is it that these people, when we see them complain about ROMs, and I don't know if John Hancock necessarily has ever complained about ROMs, you know, but I'm just using that as an example, you know, all these rare collectors, right? Why is it that they are seen as the custodians? These are the caretakers of a hobby, when the irony is these people, for all intents and purposes, are just playing the investment market. That's all they're doing. They're just playing the market. You know, how many of these people at the end of the day really probably don't give a flying fuck? They don't give a shit about gaming, really, ultimately, versus the collecting. It's about them. It's about them. It's about them. It's not about the hobby. And you can tell it's not about the hobby. You know, these people that see themselves as caretakers for the hobby, these elitist people, can see right through this shit. Yeah. The gold medal comment comes to us from Destroyer of Heroes. On the subject of games getting more realistic, ever heard of the Uncanny Valley theory? I think it's been around since the early 50s in some form and continues to evolve in its scope. Basically, it's a theory that one day AI will become so lifelike that our brains will begin to wonder if the man-made creations have a soul. It's been pondered in sci-fi books / film over and over again in things like Blade Runner, Star Trek, Battle Angel Alita, etc. There's a thing called the Turing test, named after scientist Alan Turing, which is essentially a game of imitation to determine how lifelike a man-made creation is. In Blade Runner, it was a test administered by a machine. This concept could be applied to robots, clones, and even video game characters. So the question would be, what happens when video game AI no longer have predictable patterns like the ones in Skyrim? It's a brick wall that the brain hits, as we do not fully have the capability to understand life in that form on that plane. We would have to conclude that once video games get to that level of realism, the lines would be so blurred that video games would no longer be the escape that they once were. This is why we see such a resurgence of retro games and more simplistic gameplay mechanics and graphics. Kind of like an artist who can draw things perfectly, identical as to how they look. People will conclude, why not just take a photo instead? This is why abstract art and impressionist art are so heavily appreciated still. Everything is held by some type of anchor, including life itself. If a person loses enough anchors to their own reality, life itself can take on a new meaning or even have no meaning at all to them. Some people can easily become suicidal if they take certain types of medications that impair certain reasoning functions of their brains. There are cases of this with cancer patients who are on high doses of steroids, for instance. Well, the last thing, there's maybe three different discussions here, that I could take from this comment, but I'll stick to maybe the first paragraph. The Turing test. Blade Runner. Blade Runner, they had scenes where you had these man-made creations, very lifelike creations, and they would administer a test, to see if these robotic creations were human, right? And on intelligence, you can replicate parts of human intelligence, right? We see it right now. Siri acknowledging, data and everything like that. But there's parts to being a human when it comes to emotions that machines cannot replicate. I think one scene in Blade Runner brought up, different scenarios with animals and, basically different things on emotional levels. Humans, as we speak right now, cannot replicate emotions. But what if they could? What if they could? What if it could be perfected? What if the essence of what it means to be a human could be replicated? That is horrifying. That is absolutely horrifying on many levels. Anchors of reality. I'll jump ahead to the last line you wrote. People have their anchors to reality. People have their understandings of what reality is. But just think about the horror of actually looking across from you and seeing a perfectly replicated you, even if it's a machine, that has the code that actually can take your essence. I think that would drive certain people insane, so hopefully I'm off this earth long before any of this Blade Runner stuff starts to happen. Hopefully I'm long gone, because the future, people will create things to help human beings in the future when it comes to AI, but it's a very thin line between creating AI to help human beings and then AI that ultimately can become self-aware and destroy humanity.